Hello and very warm welcome to the Data Breakthroughs podcast. Hi everybody, this is a post-recording note that I was realizing during the episode. One of the things that I'm always advocating for is the separation between the problem space and the solution space. And one of the things that I realized during the episode is that when we having a data professional also bringing the problem and displaying it, we're actually losing a little bit of the advantage of doing a podcast about problems and solutions. What I'm thinking about going forward is that the business will contribute their problems. We're going to basically create a huge catalog with different problems that business can upload and share. And then this will be used during the episodes with the data professionals. And we're going to match basically the professional to the problem as much as possible. It doesn't mean that we all know how to solve it, but we're going to try to work on it and try to solve it together. And I hope that going forward, these episodes will get better and better as we continue. I will add a few links to this episode already that you can submit either your business problems if you are a business person who is listening to this, and data professionals if you want to come and join to this podcast and have a shared whiteboard and solve the problem. I will welcome you. And I hope you're really going to enjoy this episode. The attempt here is not anymore having an interview or something like this, but rather having something that is more practical, entertaining, challenging, and inviting everybody to join. See you in the next episode. And let's just move to the episode itself. Everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Data Breakthroughs. The idea behind it is that in each episode, we're going to bring a professional or a data consumer who is having issues with data. We're going to define a main problem, which we then going to be discussed during this episode and clarify how can we solve it. We brainstorm together. We try to figure out if it's something that we can change in the architecture. Is it something in the process? Is it something else that we can actually do to improve the environment? And by the end of the 45 minutes episode, we're going to have hopefully a solution. If not, it's going to move to you, listeners and the viewers, and suggest your own ideas how to solve it. And without further delay, I want to introduce Ilya. Hello.
Hi, Lior. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. It's a particular honor to be featuring in the first episode. Thanks for that.
Thank you very much for joining and actually willing to go the extra mile and joining something we weren't sure how it's going to be. As we discussed before, pre-recording, one of the things that I really like is all this criminal podcast. And I think that this is the direction I want to take this episode as well with you together. First of all, introduce yourself a little bit so our listeners will know who you are and what you do today. And then it's going to bring us into the problem space.
Yeah, sounds great. I do data throughout my whole professional career, which is more than 20 years for now. I started as a data engineer. Actually, before people called this job data engineer, it was called database developer in my case. Then at some point, data engineer. I was working for mostly international companies in Berlin, startups, scale-ups. My last 3 or 4 jobs were more leading data teams. I did different domains. I think I saw a lot of data projects, all possible technologies and tools. So I'm kind of beyond this point of my career where I paid too much attention to technologies and tools, and I try to talk about principles now and how it all belongs together. And last but not least, I think I saw things going wrong in every possible way. So I'm quite, of course, curious how can we fix it together and how can we investigate the problems and discuss.
We're going to do an investigation together today. How to avoid data pipelines break and influence the dashboards used for decision making. This is the problem that you raised. Would you like to explain why it's so important?
I mean, companies use data to make business decisions, or ideally they do it, right? They should. And people used to call it like data-driven decision making. I'm now trying to go a bit away from it because I think the decision making should be data informed, not necessarily data driven. So sometimes you need to trust your gut and just do the opposite of what the data says in terms of business. But nevertheless, you need the data, right? And I think nobody is arguing that you need the data to run a complex system, which every company is. Now you have this data, you collect it from sources, you put it somewhere, you provide it to people who need it. And of course, if it breaks, I think the main issue is not that the data is not there, is not available, or that the data is wrong. And the problem is if you do it a few times, people stop trusting your data. And either they get back to like purely gut feelings and opinions in business decisions, or even worse, they just bypass your systems and your teams and they go to the source data, I don't know, Google Analytics, whatever they use, and do some Excel magic on their own. And this is the problem because it's very easy to lose the trust of the business stakeholders and it's really difficult to gain it back. So I think breaking of a data pipeline is okay as long as you can detect it before your users do. Like if you have observability, if you can fix things before it gets to the end user, it's all good. If it gets to the end user, you should see how you avoid it. And I think I can talk for hours about this problem, honestly.
When we're talking about this problem, I think this is something that is very common, right? There is many times that people actually losing trust in the data. I think it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem in our universe, at least. Would you like to describe maybe the situation? When does it happen? How does it happen exactly? And so on, so we can understand a little bit better the problem. Would you like to describe maybe the situation a bit?
Yeah, definitely. So probably the best example to bring here would be an IoT startup I worked for. I was a first data person hired. My job was to build the data team and the data platform. I started in product, actually created some backlog, and then moved back to engineering. So the problem there was, first, it was a greenfield. They didn't have anything. And then when we started to build a platform and people started to use it, we were collecting data from multiple sources, but two of them were internal in the company, ERP system and the team maintaining it, and the web shop, basically their main production system. Both were producing data, both were sending data to us. We stored them in some model and provided to the business through BI tools. Both teams were actively developing. It was a startup, and they kept changing everything. Data structures, table, schemas, names of the columns, and so on. And those changes constantly broke our pipelines, which led to the fact that Tableau dashboards were not available, or even worse, were showing wrong data. So I think this was really a very classical example of data producers constantly making changes, moving with a high speed, and no defined interface between data and the rest of the company.
So the trigger, if I understand from this, whenever the pipeline got broken, it was because of schema changes, right?
Schema changes, new features, which people forgot to discuss with the data folks, deprecating old features. Sometimes there was a column which was used to identify user, and then it was deprecated, and then somebody decided, why creating a new column? It's called ID, let's use it for, I don't know, device ID. I mean, I'm maybe a bit oversimplifying, but like reutilizing some data structures for the new purpose and this kind of bad practices. Yeah.
And then when we're talking about the tech stack, you mentioned Tableau. What other system did you have in there?
We started with a very simplistic setup. Like when I joined, they did have one data analyst who just plugged his Tableau to the production system, and he almost ruined the production each time he ran a big query because it was done on a production database. We created a proper ETL with Airflow. We got data with Airflow. We put it into, we had AWS setup there. So we actually used just RDS, so hosted Postgres to store because the data was not that big. Yes, and the BI tool was Tableau. We also had Redash for self-source analytics. So the Tableau was more an expensive tool for like more important, like for top management and people who were working with data on a daily basis. They had on top the Redash.
And then what was the tension actually? People were frustrated, decisions, managers. What was the situation exactly?
People stopped using data. Like as I mentioned in the description and in a problem statement, people were very excited in the beginning. Like the CFO, for example, was one of our biggest stakeholders, and he was a very cool Irish guy, like very direct and very pushy sometimes. So he wanted to have multiple reports and dashboards, and we built all of them, and he was super happy. But then at some point the numbers didn't match, and he was unhappy. And then next week the numbers we were showing so the numbers kept changing themselves backwards. The numbers for previous week were not the same as the week before. And this, like for this particular metrics, it was impossible. So multiple sources of truth, different reports which were just contradicting each other. Some things were just not available when he needed them, and also other stakeholders. And then he just put somebody with Excel, with a lot of Excel tables on our source data, and said, yeah, just do it with I don't remember, some reporting from ERP probably. I mean, this is one thing. Of course, you have a frustration on both engineering teams and data team in our case, because data people feel somebody just broke my system and I have to take responsibility for somebody else's action. I have no control over this data. People responsible for producing data producing modules, they also are unhappy because they don't want data to slow them down. They think data is something somebody makes on top of their work and it's like secondary. So they don't want to have a dependency, and each time they want to change something, be like limited. And of course, there was a lot of, us and them. Like, we are data, we are good. Those bad engineers are breaking our systems, and vice versa. Like, you are not a real engineers, you are just doing data with some GUI tools. So I think the problem was also that it was a functional setup. We had this functional data team, functional teams. Like, back then, people didn't do cross-functional or embedding data people into domains yet, and all the drawbacks of the setup were quite obvious.
Thanks for that. And when we're trying to solve the main problem to them, what are the boundaries that we're setting up for ourselves? What we do not want to touch?
That's a good question. So you're asking about the scope, right? If we want to solve this dependency issue, like what do we want not to talk about? I think
Correct.
maybe we should leave stakeholders and business aside, even so it's difficult, right? So because whatever you do in data, you do for somebody, and like saying we ignore or we just don't talk about business needs, we just pure technically now, maybe it's not so smart. Maybe observability is a huge topic in itself. You can do checks, you can do platforms which will show you alarms when things go wrong. I think maybe we should not go into it too much today. Maybe we should focus on how do you detect that something changed? How do you manage the change? How do you manage the change in a way that it's not slowing down and limiting engineering teams? So I would say observability probably out of the scope. Business maybe also, like, it doesn't really matter what business does with this data for now. It's just important that you had a pipeline. If a change happens, there should be a solid process to allow the change, but also assure that the pipeline and the data deliverables are not at risk.
I am drafting together now a clarity statement. I will love to hear your view about it. We can change it. You have full access to the board as well, so feel free. Clarity statement. We focus on changing management and culture to enable data and pipelines to be delivered with minimal damages to the users. What do you think?
Well, yeah, maybe, let me think. I mean, maybe it's already a solution, what I will now mention, but maybe somehow, no. Okay. So change in management and culture to enable data and pipelines to be management, you mean like management, people management, company management, or you mean more technical?
We
Maybe
can
technology.
take it.
Maybe should add technology. So change in technology management and culture. Yeah, to enable
Technology
data
and management.
Yeah, no, but then to enable data and to be delivered to the end user with, like, while keeping the possibility to change. I think we are not mentioning that the systems out there, they are changing and they should be changing. That's the idea of agile, right? So technology and culture. No, we focus on changing technology management and culture to assure stable pipelines and data deliverables, and assure stable pipelines and data products while keeping the agile and quick way of working on the data producing side. Yeah, that's maybe
Agile. Again, we focus on changing technology management
and
and
culture
culture.
to ensure stable pipelines while ensure agile way of working and high pace on the data producing side. Does it make sense to you?
Yep. Just for the listeners to explain to you, we're working together now on a board here on Figma. This is why this back and forth. We're working on defining everything. And yes, the idea is basically to do it almost live and then record it together with you.
Like in this crime series, you have a huge board with pictures pinned to it, and so that's basically what we are doing now, right? Yeah, investigating on a board.
We need to have a board, then this is the fun part about it. So what the listeners now not going to be part of is the next 15 minutes where we're going to take a little bit a break to a brainstorm. The idea behind it is that each of us can create his own space, his own thoughts. We can put in here basically ideas, concerns, strengths, resources, quick wins, and anything else that we think is relevant for the brainstorming. So how we can actually improve, how we can solve the statement that we just put in place. We can also touch a little bit architecture on a very high level. So we're not going to talk about adding specific tools, but rather how can we improve the process to make it a little bit more efficient for the solving the statement that we have. Sounds cool?
Yeah,
So
sounds like a plan to me.
I will pause now the podcast and we're going to go to a 15 minutes brainstorming. See you in 15 minutes. 1 second. I can share my screen. Right?
Yeah, I can see it.
It's working.
That's nice.
And we are back after 15 minutes of brainstorming. Each of us has its own board to discuss. And while we were recording, I discovered that I can actually also share my screen here, which will be, I believe, super helpful for the rest of the episode. Cool. So, Ilya, would you like to start with your board and what you managed to arrive to in the brainstorming area?
Yeah, happy to elaborate. So basically, I had 4 ideas of things you might do, you might try, and then some thoughts on each of them. As it's a brainstorming, some ideas are very bold or like just crazy. Particularly the first one. Let's put everyone into one huge team. Just let's put people who produce data and people who consume data and people who process data all together, and they work together on the feature and they do everything. I think that's the best solution if you have like a very small company. It can work if your whole engineering is, 10 people. Maybe you should not actually separate data people from the rest. Maybe you should just say you guys work together all as a huge team. But of course, that's not a solution for every. The second would be more on the social side. You can take some measures to improve collaboration between engineers. Well, on both sides you have engineers, but between software engineers and data engineers, for example. I did it in one of my roles. I was a director data for a relatively big department. We were close to 30, and we had similar issues, and we did many of the things I will talk about. So guilds, you can do like internal guilds, you can do hackathons, also internal, where people come together and work and get to know each other and like each other, hopefully. Also, what worked well for us was coding dojos. So just take some funny, interesting thing and do it together, code together, throw away what you did after the session. But you can Google if you don't know the technique. I think it's quite cool and engineers like it, and it's just 1 hour per week or maybe per sprint. So it's something the companies can invest. Yeah, and the idea is that people from different teams do it. You don't do it within your team. Then team exchange programs. This is a bit more bigger organization effort, but we actually put data engineers into production teams for a sprint or maybe even for a quarter in some cases. So they work with them on a daily basis on their tasks, because they're also developers, of course, and understand the struggles and the daily challenges of another team. And somebody from this data producing team is for the same amount of time coming to the data platform team, for example. They work together with data engineers. They understand how painful it is when things break and when they need to maybe fix something on a very short notice. So I think this works good because, again, people strengthen connections, people put each other into, they can take perspectives of others much better after these initiatives. But of course, it requires quite some organizational effort. And I also think that this only works in a good times, and by good times I mean first, company should be financially like stable enough to be able to allow themselves this kind of, to afford this kind of initiatives. And also when things get hard, like when it's real production issue, sometimes it doesn't really work. Even though people like each other through coding dojos, when it comes to work or promotions or like, I don't know, some really disciplinary stuff, it's not really healthy. Cool. Moving to more like technical solutions, let's move data people into domains, which is also known under the trademark data mesh. Not a trademark, under the name data mesh. I like the idea of data mesh. I did quite some research on it, and I spoke with many people. I think it's a great idea. I think if you do it right, it's really helpful, but of course, it's not a silver bullet. Also, decentralizing a complex system setup comes with a price. Yeah, you still need to maintain the connections, and governance becomes an issue, or is maybe more difficult than in a centralized setup. And your organization needs to be big enough. You cannot do it in a smaller company. It's also obvious. The good thing is here, teams really take end-to-end responsibility. In my example, coming back to my example with ERP, if we would put a data engineer and a data analyst in the ERP team, and those people will build the part of the Tableau which is providing data about ERP processes and data, then they would work on it at the same time as the new features in the ERP team. So it would be like just one sprint, one deliverable, and it would be tested together. This is about merging data and products and producing data products and not seeing data as something on top. A big shift in the mindset, huge effort for organizations, not something easy to implement. And coming to the maybe more pragmatic way, which is more relying on tools and technologies, and the last one is data contracts. I think some people in software engineering know about API first concept, where before you develop two systems, you actually define the API and agree on the API. It's similar. You have data contract between teams. In this case, you say, this is how my data will be delivered. You have some schemas, you can version them, you can do breaking, non-breaking changes, agree on some processes around it, and you can have integration tests. So you can actually say in your staging, for example, environment, is it breaking any tests? Is the change I did to my production database actually breaking some dashboard? Or in this case, some contract between the teams. I guess this is a good thing, but again, it can be overkill for many setups. I was working with a company, I was consulting. Recently, I switched to contracting and to freelance, and I'm more on the consulting side. So I was consulting people, and I said, like, hey guys, you need data contracts, and they actually made an argument they don't, because they said, we are like 3 people, 2 people are producing data, and 1 person is responsible for the pipelines. We have Slack. This is our contract. We talk to each other, we agree. If it works for you, that's fine. But I guess for a bigger setups, maybe it's not that easy. It requires tools, schema registries, for example, or other tools to control that the contracts are not being violated, and it all needs to be maintained, all this metadata, and the schema evolution is hard. Like if you version your schemas, if you have different versions of producing apps and consuming apps, it can be very, very messy very soon. So I think it requires quite some discipline and seniority to go this path. And the quick win is you see when things breaks before you ship, because you see if the contract is, like if this data set is actually good or not. Yeah, so this is my thoughts on this. Sorry if it was a bit more detailed, but what do you think, Lior? Does it make sense to you?
It sounds awesome. So on the first part, you talked about the people and how basically we can make it a little bit streamlined better when we're talking about the people. On the other side, you mentioned data mesh, which I also love and also hate at the same time. I think that a lot of companies read the first few pages of we decentralize. They didn't go the next step. And this is where things getting lost many times with data mesh. And for me, like when I'm thinking about it, it's always the balance between what we centralize and what we decentralize. And this is something that we need. It's a very fine balance based on the organization. That organization also needs to identify what they can actually decentralize and what they cannot. As the story you mentioned at the beginning, right? It's teams that, or data producers that are not even aware on what is the damage of the data breaking having on the downstream teams. And I think that here, this is again, this conversation about the centralized, decentralized, which will bring us in a second to my solution. And the data contracts, I think it's very similar to what I had in mind as well when I was thinking about it. Should we go to my brainstorming?
If I may very quickly react to what you said, so starting with people is basically what I always do. So I always start with people everywhere. Every company I joined, I spent first few weeks like actually connecting with people and understanding people, because I think tech is secondary, honestly, and tools and technologies, they follow. Data mesh is a big topic for me recently. I did a video blog. I gave a talk on a actually human size of the data mesh and how much social component is there. And exactly as you say, I'm totally agree. It's a bit of a misunderstanding, just applying something by the book, and also cargo cult, like just doing somebody else does it, then it should work for us. But isn't it the same with Agile? Like people cannot read Agile manifesto, which is 1 page long, and they just say, "Oh, you need to do 2 week sprints, and you can change planning all the time. Great, let's do it." And they call it Scrum, right? They don't understand the very, very basic things about bringing business and tech together, for example. Like most setups I saw just ignore this part. And this is a bit sad because the ideas are good. And then people say Agile doesn't work, data mesh doesn't work. But okay, that's just a bit of whining now.
Cool. So if we're going to go to my brainstorming area, so I
Please.
didn't brainstorm, I didn't add much. I less touched the people side because what I'm thinking about is people cannot be changed in most organization. It's not, and as you mentioned in the pre-recording, a session that we had, it's hard to hire today. It's really hard to find good engineers that can do what you need. So I decided to go away from this part, and my point is quite alignment to your number 4 point, implementing some kind of a robust flagging system based on schema validation. And then also separating the data producers from the processing. So one of the things that I learned, for example, in some of the organizations I worked with, is when you're giving analysts raw data access, many times they're going to use the data and it's going to add for them a lot of time of QAing because they're not sure what is the raw data that they're looking at. And many times this data is not what they supposed to have, so they're wasting also time sometimes on querying it, and it's extra cost for the organization. So one of the ideas that I had was, let's separate it. Let's have a landing zone where all the data is landing and arriving to, and then from there it's going to move into a second layer where it's going to be accessible by the analysts. And there we're basically going to implement this schema validation. So we're going to make sure the data is correct. So on the one side, we're making sure data is not getting lost. On the second part is that the schema is validated. And then establish a strict contract between the data producers and the consumers. So there is also an understanding by the producers what they're producing and why they're producing it. What is the added value basically for the consumers that they're serving? And create some kind of a formal streamlined process for pipeline changes. So whenever there is a pipeline change, this is what you need to go through. This is the process you need to work with. That was the thing here that's going to help us basically to ensure that changes in the schemas are well communicated. And this, again, when we're talking about data product, this is a very important part as well from my side. It's like, how do you maintain how do you making sure that the product is running smoothly and not creating hiccups for the users that are going to use it. And then creating an incident protocol, which is another part that I was saying, okay, so we have now the schema, we have the separation between the raw data and the use data, we have some kind of a data contracts, we have a schema validation. Whenever the validation is broken, we need to do some kind of a protocol of an incident. How do we handle it? What is sensitive data and what is not sensitive data? What is having high impact and low impact on the users? And I think that this was another thought that I have in here. Of course, also having SLA. So on top of the data contract, have an SLA. If something is broken on marketing data and we know that they're using it daily to optimize their campaigns, then we have X amount of time to fix it, 1 day or up to 24 hours and so on and so on. Otherwise, it's getting severity increase and so on. And what I try to do is also in the architecture, I try to paint it a little bit or try to create some flow on this part. Is that there is the ingestion part where when we're dropping fresh data, and then it goes into a schema validation. If it match, everything is fine. Then it's going to go into the warehouse, accessible by anybody who needs it. If it doesn't, it's going to go to no match, identify the issue. So basically going to mark what is the problem that we identified in the schema and going to send it back to the ingestion part. So it's going to wait there for somebody to fix it. And at the same time, it's going to create some kind of a schema validation incident, which basically going to trigger the teams and everybody working with the data to be aware that there is an issue with the data. This was my brainstorming area. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of things you mentioned, I would second. I think what you said is like different zones or different quality. Yeah, I mean, I think it's some people nowadays call it like data medallion architecture. As far as I understand, it's very similar. You have bronze, silver, and gold areas in your data warehouse, and you say bronze is like the raw data, silver is processed but not for end consumer yet, and gold is basically what maybe previously people called data marts. So something which is a data product and ready data sets which can be consumed. And those should be documented, those should have quality criteria, quality checks, ownership as well. So I think we are going into like a lot into data governance topics, but that's probably good because things breaking is exactly what data governance should prohibit. So, and technically, yeah, I mean, I guess it depends a bit on your setup. Sometimes you have data sources and then you pull data from there. Sometimes you push data through some queues. Sometimes you have event-driven architectures in production where actually maybe you have microservices and they talk to each other through the bus, through the messages, and your data, all you need to do is just plug to this data and ping this, like keep these events and do something with them. It heavily depends on the architecture, on the people you have, on the tools you use. So I think what we are talking today, we won't have a solution like one size fits it all. We are talking more about tools, principles, like toolbox. And depending on your situation, you should probably pick some of those. I would also separate logically data quality checks from the contracts because I think in your like setup as a bit together. For me, data contract is really an interface between two systems. Like system A produces, and by the way, I stopped saying consuming data, like data consumer, because I think it's the wrong word. Many smart people say it's the wrong word. You don't consume data because data is still there. It's not like water or food which you can consume. It's more you use the data, you can work with it, you are a data user. I don't even know. But let's for now, for simplicity, stay with data producers, data consumers. You have data producers, they want to push some data to your system and you can reject it. You can say, no, it's just not the right schema. It's not according to our contract. Like, please fix. Maybe you don't delete it or you don't ignore it. You put it to some storage for like wrong messages, for incorrect data, and then you can go and check and depending on the situation, maybe fix and reload. Data quality checks are for me more on the consumer side. Before I ship something to the end user, I want to be sure I don't have an age which is negative. I don't have an age which is 500 years, for a person, unless it's like somebody in old castle. Yeah, but
Bigfoot arrived.
exactly. So what I'm trying to say, data quality checks are super important, and it's a huge topic for me and for I think many data people out there. Yeah, and data contracts can use data checks as well. Probably you cannot just check that the schema is right. You can also check that the content of the data they are delivering is okay. Yeah. But this is difficult. Cool. Yeah, and I also like that you connected things together. Like in your picture, it's more a flow diagram. Like I was more just brainstorming and like mentioning things which come to my mind. In your case, it's a bit more connected.
I just try to simplify it. I think that each of us have a different approach to solving problem, and I think this is also part of this podcast is to show that there is these different approaches to things.
That's the beauty of working
exactly.
with other people, right?
Exactly. And there is a saying that, if you're going to go to a village, there is always 10 people in the village and 15 different opinions. That's exactly the same. And the idea behind it is actually now that we need to refine it into 4 actions and 3 insights that we're getting out of it. So when we talked about the main problem, the clarity statement, just to remind everybody again, what is it? We focus on change in technology, management, and culture, ensuring stable pipelines while allowing agile way of working and high speed on the data production side. So this is what we try to solve. Based on the discussion that we had today, what insights do we want to drive out of it? So one of them I already wrote that you mentioned before. We want a one solution fits all, which is completely fine.
Mm-hmm.
If you allow me insight number 2, I will say data mesh is still alive and still relevant. Also, people are trying to kill it lately.
The amount of something is dead in my LinkedIn feed is just crazy. Everything is dead, yeah? And I remember 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, SQL was dead. Like, no,
Yes.
SQL was so huge, right? And SQL was dead, and like, don't do it. So I don't pay attention to those anymore. Like, stupid ideas are dead, great ideas are still alive, and I think the data mesh for me is more on the second. Again, it's just a philosophy. It's not a solution which you can roll out or install in your company, right? It's not a database. Data mesh is not that, in my opinion. I think the idea to decentralize data is actually very powerful. But of course, another example, my favorite example, is if you decentralize a shitty monolith solution, you won't magically get a beautiful engineering system, right? Like, just splitting into microservices is not a solution. You need to rework the things. Same here.
Correct.
Like, since decentralizing, if your data team is not performing and you just say you move them to teams, it won't magically fix everything. If people don't talk to each other, if people don't have crucial skills,
Agree.
So I'm very passionate about the topic. It's not that,
And
it's a culture, and it can be a solution to the problem we are discussing today, I believe.
to add one thing to it, I think that this is something that a lot of us keep forgetting, but agile, most organizations don't do agile by the book. They took the philosophy and they evolve it into the organization culture and they fit it in some way. They took the main framework, but they make it work. And the same thing goes with data mesh. And this is where I think about it. This is really cultural thing. It's not, I read the book, this is what it says there, and this is what I need to do one by one. There are spaces for a little bit out of the box thinking and changes if needed.
I think all successful organizations do it this way. Unsuccessful implementation of Scrum I saw were, we don't do it by the book, we just pick things which we think are good, and the problem is people are picking simple things and ignoring more complex things, but very important things. And then it doesn't work, and then they blame the ideas and the agile ideas. So again, this example, we do 2-week sprints. We allow our stakeholders to constantly change what they want during the sprint as well. And this is something we call Scrum. Like, no retrospectives, no trying to improve from iteration to iteration, no collaboration with users. That's a problem because, of course, it's not something you should just do by the book. Of course not. But at the same time, you need to understand this book and then make some smart choices, which work for you. As you say, I saw it working perfectly. I saw terrible implementations of both data mesh and agile.
And maybe third insights, would you like to suggest? What is your third one?
Well, I'm not sure if you like this one, but I would say 80% people, 20% technology. Even if you have perfect schema registry with all possible features to do schema migration and tooling and this and that, if people fight each other and blame each other for every bug and like shift responsibility and say, I don't care about this data and what you do with it, it's not my job. Like, my job is to do this front end and like just leave me alone. Like, no tools will help. So I think people are at the end the root cause of the most problems, and also the only way to fix them.
Awesome. I agree. I don't say no. So I do believe that people at the end of the day, it's the most important part, because if you can create the transparency and the communication, most of the problems that we see today going to be gone.
And your point, I also agree that you cannot change people, and this is something which is much more difficult to change. Attitude, culture, like, it's like there's no clear way to change it. What you can change the people you have. If those are wrong people, or if they are majority, you can change the place. You can move on to somewhere where you have people who are in your world like better fit for you. So I think I still try to change those things, but of course it's much more difficult.
And if we're talking about 4 action items, what do we do tomorrow to solve our statement? What would it be?
First and foremost, talk to each other. Like, identify the problem, explain producers what happens with this data, explain why it's important, show them that you are maybe fixing some pipelines in the night because somebody needs them in the morning. Like, it won't necessarily, like, it depends on the level of empathy they have, of course, but it won't necessarily fix it, but at least they are aware that you're not just making stress. Then I think sit together and write down how the data should, like, even if you don't have schema registry, if you don't have tooling, just do a Notion page, Coda page, piece of paper, pen and paper. Just write down, you are sending us an event each time a user makes an order. Like this event should have, this order should have ID, price, and price cannot be empty. Like agree on these basic things, Then automated checks. I think even if you just reject, even if it's a very simple checks, not going into details, rejecting empty messages, rejecting messages which were obviously wrong, would already be helpful, because what should not happen that your users know about data outages before you do. So at least you should be aware. And again, there are so many tools nowadays, like every single ETL tool can send messages to Slack if things go wrong. It's not a rocket science anymore.
Fourth action item, do we have one? If not, we don't have to.
Well, no, I think after you sit down and write down and after you do automatic data checks, pick probably a data quality tool or a data contracts tool. I saw very cool initiatives on open standards for data contracts. Like there's an open standard. I can also add the links to the episode description later, send them to you, Lior. There are open source tools, there are like hosted tools for that. Just check what's out there. It's not about tools, it's about understanding. You need to agree on the interface and follow and automating the test. So I would say pick the right tool and start rolling it out. Preferably before you build the data platform. Like start with the interface and then build the data platform.
Can I suggest another action point actually here? Maybe.
Please do. Yeah, please.
Have a strong incident process, data incident process.
Sorry. I forgot to mention this. This is a very good thought you had, and I didn't think this direction at all. And this is really crucial, because if things will break, whatever you do, things will break, right? You need a healthy culture to learn from the failures, like not blame, and some people say celebrate failure culture. So unless this failure puts your whole business at risk, that's okay. You just fix it and you are sure it's not happening again. So yes, the process, root cause analysis, incident management. What do we change so we don't have exactly the same problem next time? That's all mega crucial. Yeah. Thanks for bringing this perspective.
So basically we have 5 action points now to take out of it. So the first one is talk to each other and create transparency about the process. Second one is sit down and write down the events, map them, understand what needs to be there, what metadata needs to be arriving with it, and document it. Then automatic data checks, rejection events if something doesn't fit, so you have some kind of a control over what arrives to the warehouse at the end. Having a data monitoring tool, which is also a very important part, and there is a lot of options out there today. And of course, having data incidents process that actually help you to identify problem, to resolve them, and also document how you can avoid them in the future, or what action needs to be taken actually from the different teams to avoid this going further.
Yes.
Any other thoughts before we arrive into our last part for today?
Oh no, I think we discussed a lot, and I also like the outcome.
So we're moving now to the reflecting and pondering. Are there any open questions for us actually that we should still answer?
I think the question is maybe when to apply what, because we there are a lot of tools, again, like when to apply which tool and where to start. Or okay, maybe let me put it this way. If you're talking about a small startup or a scale up which is growing like crazy, you have fires everywhere, you have like everything breaks. So where do you put your attention? Where do you put which fires do you let burn and which do you start fighting? And I think this is an open question and depends on the situation, of course. Even with these checks and maybe data contracts, I would start with the business critical parts. From your example, if a marketing is a stakeholder who needs this data and makes some business decisions based on it and invests money based on these numbers, then maybe start with it. Don't do checks on something which has less impact to business. But this is more strategic questions, and that's something where you, with your expertise, maybe have much more to say than myself. It's like having limited resources, how to split those.
Give up, throw the data, you don't need it. Trust your guts. Easiest.
It works for many people. Honestly,
It does.
the more I do data, the less I'm sure the adding value. No, I'm joking. We do add value, and
Of
you
course.
cannot fly a Boeing like without a dashboard, right? It's obvious. But you can ride a bicycle without a dashboard. You can just look around and ride it. And even you can
Exactly.
close your eyes for a while, maybe.
And hope you're going to cross the street. But there is a lot of solution, right? And it really depends on the size of the company. And I think that when we're talking about small companies, this is also a part of budgeting. And this is something that a lot of people tend to forget, because when you're a small company, you don't have big budget that you can spend on data. And data is becoming third priority or fourth priority. And you need to know also the right moment when to introduce it. So this is when you have the capabilities and the resources.
I have an idea for your next podcast with your next guest. Maybe you can discuss demonstrating value of the data team. It's a huge topic. Like since the layoffs and since the whole industry is currently struggling, how do you prove the value? How do you show decision makers that you are not a cost factor, but actually you are bringing money? But that's not so easy, right? Unless you are selling data products to your B2B customers.
I just finished another series of in my blog about it, and about creating the impact and how to measure impact. And I think this is one of the biggest problems that we're facing right now with a lot of data teams, the inability to present the value of the data team existent. And a lot of executives starting to question, why do I need these people? And why do I need to hire them? And why do I need to have somebody that is responsible for strategy, and another one that's responsible for technology, and another one that's responsible for product? And it's a big topic. And I don't think we can solve it in 45 minutes, even not in an hour.
Of course. So yes, and yes, and I'm talking from my personal experience.
Yeah.
That's what's going on. Yeah.
And I will invite you to add here your key takeaways afterwards. We can share it also with the readers as we continue. And now to the big reveal. Did we get a breakthrough in your view on the problem statement that we had?
I think so. That's probably would be true for most of the problems, I guess. you will discuss in the series. It's just too big and too complex to have a breakthrough in 45 minutes. So if we would find a solution now, we could just make a lot of money next week and stop working. So I don't think there is a solution. There is a clear solution. As with all this complex stuff, people produce data, people consume data. So you are in between. There are tools, there are ways to mitigate, but I don't have a clear answer. The more I know about it, the less answers I have actually.
So I marked it as a question mark from my side, because I think that on the one side, yes, we have something or some process in place. Is it a breakthrough that going to solve, as you said? Not sure. Otherwise, we would have been millionaires already. But it's going in the right direction. And this is the time actually to invite the listeners to suggest their solution and maybe their ideas on how to create something innovative out of it and solve the problem. And I think that we're arriving towards the end of the episode. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. Any famous last words before we zooming out?
Well, no, I mean, also, I just want to say thanks a lot for having me. It was a pleasure. I had a very nice chat with a colleague. I didn't even thought that we are recording, honestly. For me, it was more just as chatting with you as we used to do a few times. So it was really very, very nice vibe. Thanks for that. And I hope it's going to be useful for somebody out there listening.
So thank you very much for joining. I really enjoyed this session. I really enjoyed this format, and I really enjoy the fact that you were jumping on this idea that I just posted on LinkedIn, and I was like, yeah, I have this idea, crazy idea. Let's see if it can work. And I see it as something that we still can work on. I can still develop the format. So please, listeners, if you have any ideas, feel free to suggest it. I'm going to add all of the board as well as the other links and all of our notes and documentation in the link through this episode. And until the next time, Ilya, thank you very much for joining. I really appreciated the time. It took us a little bit longer than what we expected, but I hope that the end product will be quite fascinating for people to listen to. And I will see you all in the next episode.
Thanks, Lior.
Thank you. This was the end of the first episode of Data Breakthroughs. The idea is to continue in this structure, and as mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, there are links in the show notes that you can submit your problem or you can apply to come and join the show. The idea at the end of the day is that we create an environment where we basically bring in a problem, displaying it, explaining why it's a problem, and then trying to solve it together and present a possible solution, or at least a start of a solution, because most likely you cannot solve complex things in 45 minutes. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Until then, I will invite you to subscribe to my Substack, Cooking Data, to other updates regarding the podcast. I wish you a great day and see you soon.